Today we're going to examine a critical question in the scientific community. Is it truly necessary for breakthrough scientists, researchers, and students to move to Silicon Valley to realize their ideas and succeed with startups? Or can other developed countries offer equal opportunities for realization? Let's start by understanding this through the lens of network theory. The value of being in a particular location can be modeled using Metcalfe's law. The value V equals K times N squared, where N is the number of connected users or participants in a network, and K is a proportionality constant representing the value per connection. In the context of Silicon Valley, N represents the number of connected innovators, investors, engineers, and entrepreneurs in the ecosystem. Notice that the value grows quadratically. This means doubling the number of participants quadruples the potential value of the network. This is the mathematical foundation of why clusters matter. Imagine Silicon Valley has 10,000 highly connected innovators, while another hub has 3,000. Let's calculate the relative network values. Silicon Valley's network value is K times 10,000 squared, which equals 100 million K. The other hub's value is K times 3,000 squared, which equals 9 million K. The ratio is about 11 to 1. Silicon Valley provides roughly 11 times more network value, despite having only about 3 times more participants. This is the power of the quadratic scaling. But wait, is network size the only factor that matters? Let's be more rigorous and examine other critical variables that affect innovation success. We can model the probability of success for a researcher or startup using a more comprehensive equation. The probability of success is a function of 5 key variables: N for network size, C for capital availability, T for talent density, R for regulatory environment, and L for lifestyle and living costs. Let's try to quantify each of these factors for different regions and see what we discover. First, let's analyze Silicon Valley's profile. Network size N. Very high. We'll give it a score of 10 out of 10. You have access to thousands of experienced founders, investors, and technical experts. Capital availability C. Extremely high, also 10 out of 10. Silicon Valley has the highest concentration of venture capital in the world. In 2023, about half of all U.S. venture funding went to the Bay Area. Talent density T. Very high, score 9 out of 10. You have Stanford, Berkeley, and countless tech companies providing a steady stream of skilled workers. Regulatory environment R. Moderate, score 6 out of 10. California has business-friendly policies, but also high taxes, and some regulatory burdens. Living costs L. Very high negative impact, score 2 out of 10. The cost of living is astronomical. Median rent for a one-bedroom apartment exceeds $3,000 per month. Now let's compare this with Boston and Cambridge, another major innovation hub. Network size N. High, score 7 out of 10. Smaller than Silicon Valley, but still substantial, especially in biotech and life sciences. Capital availability C. High, score 8 out of 10. Boston is the second largest venture capital market in the U.S., particularly strong in healthcare and biotech. Talent density T. Very high, score 9 out of 10. MIT, Harvard, and numerous other universities provide exceptional talent. Regulatory environment R. Moderate, score 6 out of 10, similar to California with some additional challenges in Massachusetts. Living costs L. High negative impact, score 3 out of 10. Expensive, but slightly more manageable than Silicon Valley. What about European innovation hubs like Berlin, London, or Stockholm? Network size N. Moderate to high, score 5 to 7 depending on the specific city, growing but smaller than U.S. hubs. Capital availability C. Moderate, score 5 to 7. European venture capital is growing but still significantly smaller. In 2023, U.S. VC funding was about 5 times larger than all of Europe combined. Talent density T. High, score 7 to 8. Europe has excellent universities and technical talent. Regulatory environment R. Variable, score 4 to 7. Some countries like Estonia have very business-friendly policies, while others have more bureaucracy. GDPR and other regulations can add complexity. Living costs L. Moderate, score 5 to 6. Generally more affordable than Silicon Valley, though London is quite expensive. And what about Asian innovation hubs like Singapore, Bangalore, or Shenzhen? Network size N, growing rapidly, score 6 to 8. Particularly strong in hardware and manufacturing for Shenzhen, software for Bangalore. Capital availability C, increasing, score 6 to 8. Asian VC is growing fast, especially in China and India. Talent density T, very high, score 8 to 9. Enormous pools of engineering talent, particularly in India and China. Regulatory environment R, variable, score 5 to 8. Singapore is very business-friendly, while China has more government involvement. Living costs L, low to moderate, score 6 to 8. Generally much more affordable than Western hubs, though Singapore is expensive. Now here's a crucial question. Is there a critical mass threshold below which an innovation hub simply cannot sustain breakthrough innovations? We can hypothesize that the probability of breakthrough goes to 0 if network size N is below some critical threshold N critical. But this is probably too simplistic. History shows us examples of breakthroughs happening in unexpected places. Let's examine some historical counterexamples to the Silicon Valley necessity argument. The Wright brothers achieved powered flight in Dayton, Ohio, not in any major innovation hub of their time. They succeeded through systematic experimentation and engineering rigor. Marie Curie conducted her groundbreaking work on radioactivity in Paris, which was not the technological epicenter of the early 1900s. Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web at CERN in Switzerland, not in Silicon Valley or any major tech hub. More recently, Spotify was founded in Stockholm and became a global giant without relocating to Silicon Valley during its critical early years. What do these counterexamples teach us? They suggest that while location matters, it's not absolutely deterministic. Let's think about this more quantitatively. Perhaps we should think of location as a probability multiplier rather than an absolute requirement. The final probability of success equals your base probability times a location multiplier M sub location. Your base probability P sub base depends on your own capabilities, your idea quality, your execution skills, and your resilience. This is the most important factor. The Silicon Valley multiplier might be 2 to 3. This means being in Silicon Valley could double or triple your chances compared to a baseline location. Other major hubs might have multipliers of 1.3 to 1.8. Still beneficial, but less dramatic. Remote or smaller locations might have multipliers of 0.7 to 1. You might even face some disadvantages. Let's work through a concrete numerical example to make this more tangible. Suppose you're a talented researcher with a solid idea. Your intrinsic probability of success might be 5%. This is actually quite high in the startup world. In Silicon Valley, with a multiplier of 2.5, your probability becomes 12.5%. In Boston, with 1.6, it's 8%. In your home country with 0.9, it's 4.5%. The difference between Silicon Valley and staying home is a factor of about 2.8. That's significant, but not infinite. But now we need to consider costs. Moving to Silicon Valley isn't free. Let's do a proper cost-benefit analysis. What are the typical annual costs for a researcher or early-stage founder in Silicon Valley? Rent for a modest apartment, $36,000 per year, assuming $3,000 per month. Other living expenses, $24,000 per year for food, transportation, utilities. Opportunity cost, $100,000 per year if you're giving up a good job to work on your startup full-time. Total annual cost, $160,000. Over 3 years, that's nearly $500,000. Now let's calculate the expected value of moving to Silicon Valley versus staying in a lower-cost location. Expected value equals probability of success times exit value minus total costs times time period T. Let's assume if you succeed, your exit value is $10 million. This is reasonable for a moderately successful startup. Expected value in Silicon Valley, 0.125 times 10 million minus 160,000 times 3 years. That's 1,250,000 minus 480,000, which equals $770,000. Expected value at home, 0.045 times 10 million minus 60,000 per year times 3 years, assuming much lower costs. That's 450,000 minus 180,000, which equals $270,000. Silicon Valley has a higher expected value by about $500,000. So from a purely financial perspective, the move makes sense if you can afford the upfront costs and risk. But here's the critical question. What if you can't afford those upfront costs? What if you don't have savings or access to funding? This creates a wealth barrier. Only researchers and entrepreneurs who already have significant capital or who can secure visa sponsorship can afford to make this move. This is a serious equity issue in innovation. Now let's discuss a game-changing development, the remote work revolution accelerated by the COVID pandemic. Remote work changes the equation fundamentally. You can now access Silicon Valley networks without paying Silicon Valley costs. A remote but well-connected researcher might have a location multiplier of 1.4 to 1.9, much closer to being physically present. You can attend virtual meetings with investors, join online founder communities, and collaborate with talent anywhere in the world. For critical moments that require in-person presence, you can fly in temporarily. This is much cheaper than living there full-time. Let's calculate the costs and benefits of a hybrid model where you live elsewhere but visit Silicon Valley quarterly. Hybrid costs: $40,000 per year for living in a cheaper location, plus 4 trips per year at $3,000 each for flights and hotels. Total, $52,000 per year. Let's estimate the hybrid location multiplier at 1.7, losing some benefit but retaining most of it. Expected value hybrid: 0.085 times 10 million minus 52,000 times 3 years. That's 850,000 minus 156,000, giving us $694,000. The hybrid model nearly matches the pure Silicon Valley expected value, while being much more accessible financially. This is a powerful insight. Now let's discuss another critical factor. The type of innovation you're pursuing matters enormously for location decisions. For software and AI startups, physical location is becoming less critical. Your product is digital, your distribution is global, and your team can be remote. For hardware and biotech, location remains more critical. You need physical labs, manufacturing partnerships, and regulatory expertise that clusters provide. For consumer products, being close to your target market matters more than being in a tech hub. A consumer product for the Indian market might be better developed in Bangalore than Silicon Valley. Shenzhen is arguably better than Silicon Valley for hardware startups because of manufacturing proximity. Boston is arguably better for biotech because of its hospital and research density. This points to an important trend. Specialized hubs are emerging that can compete with or exceed Silicon Valley in specific domains. Silicon Valley remains the generalist hub, but specialized hubs are developing deep expertise in specific domains. Let's talk about what governments can do to create viable alternatives to Silicon Valley. This is crucial policy territory. Estonia has created an incredibly business-friendly digital infrastructure. You can start a company entirely online in hours. They offer e-residency to foreign entrepreneurs. Singapore has optimized its regulatory environment for startups, with streamlined visa processes for founders and tech workers and competitive tax rates. Israel has created a strong military-to-startup pipeline through Unit 8200, which trains world-class cybersecurity talent that then flows into startups. Canada has much more open immigration policies than the U.S., making it easier for international researchers and founders to relocate and work there legally. Instead of brain drain, we're seeing brain circulation. Let me explain this important concept. The value of brain circulation equals the sum over all periods of experience, E sub I times 1, plus a learning rate R, raised to the time period T sub I. A researcher might spend 3 to 5 years in Silicon Valley, learning cutting-edge techniques, building networks, and understanding how successful companies operate. Then they return home with that knowledge and those connections, but with much lower costs and potentially unique market insights. They can build their company with a much lower burn rate, hire talented local engineers at lower salaries, and serve local markets that Silicon Valley companies ignore. Many successful Indian startup founders worked at Google, Facebook, or Microsoft in the U.S., then returned to India to build companies like Flipkart or Ola, leveraging their experience but with Indian cost structures. One factor that has changed dramatically in the last 20 years is information accessibility. In the 2000s, much startup knowledge was localized and tacit. You had to be physically present in Silicon Valley to learn how things really worked. Today, almost everything is documented and shared online. You can read Y Combinator's startup school content, listen to podcasts from top founders, and take Stanford courses online. Information access equals local information plus alpha times global information divided by 1 plus alpha, where alpha represents the connectivity coefficient. As alpha approaches infinity, meaning perfect global connectivity, location matters less and less for pure information access. However, tacit knowledge, the unwritten rules, and cultural understanding still require some physical presence. This is why the hybrid model makes sense. Here's a counterintuitive argument. Having all innovators in one place might actually hurt innovation through groupthink. Silicon Valley has developed certain cultural patterns and assumptions. Everyone thinks about similar problems in similar ways. This is a monoculture risk. Different regions bring fundamentally different perspectives. A founder in Lagos thinks about problems differently than one in San Francisco. Historically, breakthrough innovations often come from the edge, not the center. The center is optimized for incremental innovation within existing paradigms. The probability of paradigm-shifting innovation is proportional to diversity of perspectives and approaches. So let's directly address the question, is it a waste of time for researchers and founders to move to Silicon Valley? The answer is, it depends on multiple factors. There is no universal answer. You should strongly consider moving if you need heavy venture capital for hardware or deep tech innovations where Silicon Valley still dominates. Move if you lack an initial network and need intensive mentorship. The density of experienced people in Silicon Valley is unmatched. Consider strong alternatives if you're building software or serving non-US markets. You might be better off closer to your customers. Definitely consider alternatives if you simply can't afford the upfront costs. It's better to start building somewhere affordable than to wait for funding that might never come. For many researchers and founders, the hybrid model is actually optimal. Live somewhere affordable, visit Silicon Valley strategically, and leverage remote connectivity. Let me share some analogies from nature and ecology that illuminate this question. Silicon Valley is like a coral reef. It's an incredibly rich, dense ecosystem where many species thrive. But coral reefs are also fragile and cover only a tiny fraction of the ocean. Most ocean life exists elsewhere. Or think of a redwood forest. The tallest trees grow in specific conditions in coastal California, but forests exist all over the world, and many trees thrive in different environments better than they would in redwood territory. Consider migratory birds. Some species migrate thousands of miles to specific breeding grounds. Others are successful year-round residents. Both strategies work, depending on the species and circumstances. From technology, consider the Internet. Early Internet infrastructure was heavily concentrated in the US. Today, it's a truly distributed global network. Innovation ecosystems are following a similar path. Let me summarize the key takeaways from this analysis. 1. Silicon Valley does provide a significant advantage, roughly a 2 to 3 times probability multiplier for startup success, primarily through network effects and capital access. 2. But this advantage comes with extreme costs, about $160,000 per year, creating a wealth barrier. 3. Hybrid models can capture most of the benefits at a fraction of the cost through strategic visits and remote connectivity. 4. The type of innovation matters enormously. Software and AI are less location-dependent, while hardware and biotech benefit more from specific clusters. 5. Specialized hubs are emerging that can match or exceed Silicon Valley in specific domains like biotech in Boston or hardware in Shenzhen. 6. Information access has democratized dramatically, reducing but not eliminating the advantage of physical presence. 7. Thoughtful government policy around regulation, immigration, and digital infrastructure can create viable alternative hubs. 8. Brain circulation, where researchers spend time in Silicon Valley then return home, is often superior to permanent migration for both individual and societal outcomes. So what's the final verdict? It is not a waste of time to engage with Silicon Valley if done strategically. But permanent, expensive relocation is no longer necessary for most innovators. The future is increasingly one of distributed innovation, where talent and ideas can succeed in many locations, connected through technology. Ultimately, your success depends far more on the quality of your idea, your execution capabilities, and your resilience than on your physical location. Success equals a function of your idea quality, execution capability, and network, multiplied by the location multiplier. The function matters more than the multiplier. Choose your location based on your specific circumstances your innovation type, your financial situation, and your personal life priorities. There is no one-size-fits-all answer.